Two sisters, one cowboy, and a love destined to choose only one. In the heart of the Wild West, desire and duty collide. A sky of bruised purples and fading fire stretched above the Arizona plains, and the wind carried with it the scent of mesquite and long miles ridden. Dust shimmered along the ridgeline like ghost smoke. Out of that wavering light came a single rider, his silhouette bent and weary, his horse thin-shouldered but sure-footed as it moved through the dying heat. His name was Elias Boone, though few alive still called him that. The road had taken most of what once defined him: family, land, and laughter. What remained was a man shaped by miles and silence, by scars he didn't speak of. The rifle slung across his saddle wasn't for show. The wear on its grip told of days when mercy had been a rarer thing than bullets. Ahead, the land dipped toward an Apache settlement, quiet and half-veiled in the golden dust of evening. Smoke curled upward from the cooking fires, thin and blue against the dimming horizon. He could hear the faint rhythm of wooden pestles pounding maize, the low hum of women's voices, the splash of a child at the river bend. Elias slowed his horse to a walk. He didn't raise his hand or call out. Men who had lived long in wild country knew the cost of sudden movement. A boy spotted him first, running toward the lodges before Elias could speak. Within moments, the quiet hum of the place shifted. Eyes appeared at doorways, glances quick and guarded. An old man came forward, wrapped in a shawl the color of rusted copper. His gaze held neither fear nor welcome, only the calm measure of someone accustomed to weighing intentions. Elias dismounted, the dry earth crunching under his boots. "Evenin'," he said, his voice low, roughened by wind and road. "I've got trade goods, salt coffee, some iron tools. Just passing through." The elder said nothing for a long while. Then he nodded once and motioned toward the far edge of the settlement, where visitors might rest. Elias felt the tension ease, though he knew it was only the surface of things. In lands like these, trust was not a language freely spoken. He led his horse to the shade of a cottonwood, loosened the girth, and poured a measure of water into his hat. The horse drank greedily. When Elias straightened, he found himself being watched. Two women stood near a fire pit, sisters by the look of them. The elder, Nayeli, had a steadiness to her, a calm like still water. Her eyes were dark as obsidian, her long braid bound tight, her hands working without pause as she ground corn on a flat stone. Her younger sister, Tasa, was her mirror turned to sunlight, restless, bright, laughter simmering at the edges of her silence. She tilted her head as she studied the stranger, curiosity and caution warring across her face. Elias offered a small nod, nothing more. In return, Nayeli's eyes flicked up briefly, unreadable, while Tasa smiled in that quick, reckless way of youth that hadn't yet learned the cost of it. As the evening deepened, Elias unpacked his goods near the fire, coffee beans wrapped in cloth, a few metal nails, a small knife, a pouch of tobacco. He bartered quietly, his words few. The air smelled of maize and smoke, of horses and damp earth. The sound of the river nearby folded into the low murmur of conversation. He noticed, as he worked, the rhythm of the place, how each person moved with purpose, but without hurry. The land and its people shared a patience the white settlements had long forgotten. When night came, the desert turned to shadow. The fires burned low and the wind softened. Somewhere in the dark a drumbeat began, a slow, pulsing rhythm like the heart of the earth itself. Children's laughter faded to whispers. Elias sat alone, sipping bitter coffee from a tin cup, the flames reflecting in his eyes. He thought of the road behind him, towns where greed had rotted men's hearts, where love had been a thing traded for whiskey and coin. He thought he had left all that behind. But as he looked toward the two sisters by the fire, one silent, one smiling, he felt the faint stir of something he couldn't name. Nayeli's braid glimmered in the firelight, a single strand loose against her shoulder. Tasa danced around the flames, her shawl lifting like wings. The sight tugged at something buried deep within him, a longing for things untouched by ruin. A coyote cried from the hills, its voice echoing across the empty dark. Elias listened, and a small shiver passed through him. That sound, wild and lonely, felt too much like a warning. He told himself he'd leave at first light before the warmth of this place turned to weight upon his heart. But as the night stretched on, he did not move. Something in the stillness held him there, a sense of turning, as though the earth beneath them had quietly chosen a new path, and though none of them yet knew it, the sisters by the fire, The cowboy beneath the stars. The wind had already changed direction. In the shifting dust of that red horizon, their fates had begun to braid together, unseen but unbreakable, like strands of the same long hair caught in the wind. The rains had come late that year, hard and merciless, washing down from the mountains and cutting through the valley like a blade. When the water finally withdrew, it left behind ruin. A channel split open, the small irrigation ditches that fed the Apache fields torn apart by the flood's fury. Elias Boone stayed to help. He told himself it was only until the work was done that a man should pay back hospitality with labor. But deep down he already knew that wasn't the truth. The road no longer called to him the same way it had before. Something in this valley, its silence, its scent of wet clay and cedar, had begun to quiet the restlessness that had lived inside him for years. He worked with the men and women side by side, his boots sinking in the soft mud. His hands, used to reins and rifles, learned new weight, the heft of a spade, the rhythm of lifting and tamping earth, the patience of shaping something meant to endure. The sun baked the land dry by afternoon, and his shirt clung to him with sweat. Sometimes when he paused to drink, he caught glimpses of the sisters watching from the ridge. Nayeli came often to the water's edge, her feet bare, her shawl drawn close against the wind. She never spoke first, but her presence was a kind of language, steady, deliberate, honest. When Elias greeted her, she nodded once and smiled, the kind of smile that was small but real. They spoke little, yet each word between them carried a stillness that lingered long after she walked away. Tasa, in contrast, was motion itself. She came laughing down the riverbank, tossing pebbles into the water, teasing Elias for the way he cursed softly under his breath when the mud caved in again. "The land does not obey men," she told him once, grinning. "It listens to those who listen to it." He remembered that line for days afterward, though he couldn't have said why. In the evenings, when the day's labor was done, Elias would sit by the river's bend, where the current was slow and wide. He brewed coffee over a small fire, the smell mingling with damp reeds and wood smoke. The river shimmered with dying light, turning copper, then violet, then black. The sisters were never far, sometimes together, sometimes apart. Nayeli would sit on a flat stone, weaving strands of grass into small braids that she let drift into the water. Tasa would dance barefoot in the shallows, the moon glinting off her hair as if she were made of its light. To Elias, it felt like standing between two seasons, one calm, enduring, like the steady rhythm of spring rain, the other fierce and bright, like the summer storms that left fire on the horizon. The sisters, too, began to feel that unseen shift. What had once been easy laughter between them turned to pauses, to glances that lingered too long. Nayeli's hands sometimes faltered in their work. Tasa's words, once playful, grew sharp without reason. When Elias handed Tasa a set of bright beads he had traded from a passing merchant, her delight was radiant until she saw the flicker of something unreadable in Nayeli's eyes. The river became their mirror, carrying fragments of their reflections side by side. Two faces, same blood, same shadow, but now separated by a current neither could cross without losing something precious. Days passed. The channel was rebuilt, the fields restored, but Elias made no move to leave. The old men spoke of him kindly, calling him the quiet one with the scar who mended what floods had broken. But beneath that surface peace, the air between the three of them grew thick with something unnamed. One twilight, Elias found Nayeli alone by the water, her braid undone, the strands loose around her shoulders. The sight startled him. She had always kept it bound tight, as though order itself were a duty. "The river took part of the wall again," she said quietly. "It fights what we build." He knelt beside her, watching the water catch the fading light. "It don't fight," he said after a moment. "It remembers where it once ran. Maybe it only wants to return." Nayeli looked at him then, truly looked. The wind lifted her hair, and for the first time he saw the softness hidden behind her composure. There was something in her gaze, a quiet recognition, an understanding that needed no words. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The distance between them felt both endless and fragile as glass. Then Tasa's laughter rang out from up the hill. She came running, a string of the beads Elias had given her woven through her braids. The moment broke. Nayeli rose, brushed the dirt from her skirt, and stepped away. Tasa slid to the ground beside Elias, breathless and bright. "You look tired, cowboy," she teased. "The river beats you, and still you fight it." Elias smiled faintly, but his eyes lingered on the trail of Nayeli's footsteps fading into the tall grass. That night, the settlement gathered around a communal fire. The drums beat slow and low, and the flames painted the world in bronze and shadow. Tasa danced again, wild and unrestrained, her shawl flickering like wings. Elias watched her, admiring her spirit, but his gaze drifted often toward the edge of the firelight, where Nayeli sat alone, her face turned toward the sound of the river. When the dance ended, the night fell silent except for the crickets and the faraway whisper of water moving over stone. Elias felt a heaviness settle in him, a knowing that what had begun as simple company was becoming something far more complicated. Love, he thought, was like that river, gentle until the rains came. It shaped without asking, cut through what stood before it, left behind beauty and ruin in equal measure. By the time the moon climbed high, he saw Nayeli stand and walk away, her braid trailing loose behind her. The firelight caught the edge of her shawl, and then she was gone into the dark. Tasa turned toward him, her eyes bright with unspoken hope. "You'll ride with us when the planting begins?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded. "If I'm still here?" She smiled as if she'd won some quiet victory. But far down by the river, where the moonlight touched the water, Nayeli's reflection rippled and disappeared, and in that quiet loss, the bond between the sisters began to fray, so softly that none of them felt the first tear. The wind changed before the danger showed its face. Elias felt it first, an unease that tugged at the edges of sleep. The night had been still, the kind that wrapped the desert in quiet, but now the horses in the corral stamped and snorted. Coyotes had gone silent. He rose from his blanket, hand brushing the rifle at his side, and scanned the horizon where the first hint of pale gray was lifting the darkness. Then he saw it. 5 riders, faint as shadows, coming slow through the low dust. No trader rode like that, tight formation, no call, no light. He didn't need a closer look to know them. The way one leaned in the saddle, the swagger of another, it pulled memory like a knife from an old wound. They were men he once rode with. Devlin's crew, outlaws who'd robbed mining convoys and burned more than one settlement when whiskey ruled their hands. He'd left them years ago, walked away after a killing he couldn't stomach, but it seemed ghosts rode longer than a man's conscience. He tightened his jaw. They were coming this way. By the time he reached the heart of the settlement, the drums were already calling. Men were gathering bows, women hiding children in the storerooms of clay and straw. Nayeli met his eyes from across the clearing. She didn't ask. She knew. "How many?" she said quietly. 5. "Maybe 6 if they're holding one back," he answered. Tasa appeared behind her sister, her face pale but her chin lifted. "Then we'll fight 5, she said, forcing a laugh that cracked halfway through. Nayeli turned to her, voice firm. "Go to the children. Keep them near the riverbank." Tasa hesitated. "And you?" "I'll stand here," Nayeli said simply. Elias moved among the men, checking what little they had. Old muskets, a few rifles, mostly bows and knives. He showed them how to angle their shots, how to use the narrow walls for cover. His heart pounded, not from fear, but from the bitter truth that the violence coming toward them had once followed his own tracks. When the riders reached shouting distance, Devlin's voice carried across the plain smooth as oil. "Elias Boone," he called. "Didn't reckon we'd find you hiding among the redskins?" The word burned through the air like a brand. Elias stepped forward. "You're on their land, Devlin." "Turn back," laughter answered him, dry, cruel. "You know me better than that. There's gold in these hills. Heard you knew the way." "I don't." "Well," Devlin said, drawing his revolver, "then maybe I'll ask someone else." The gunfire broke the morning open. The world became smoke and shouting, the scent of black powder and burning straw filling the lungs. Arrows sang through the air. Elias fired once, then again, the recoil biting his shoulder. One outlaw fell from his horse. Another galloped toward the huts, firing wildly. Elias saw Nayeli dart from cover, blade in hand, moving with a calm born of necessity. She was quick, steady, fearless. Tasa, farther off, was her opposite, chaotic, shouting warnings, ushering children toward the river path. The sun broke over the ridge, casting long shadows that twisted in the smoke. The light turned everything gold and terrible. Devlin came through the haze, his face grinning under a dust-black hat. "You still got it, Boone," he said, cocking his revolver. "Could have made something together, you and me." "I already did," Elias answered. "I learned what kind of man not to be," he fired. Devlin's hat jerked back, but the bullet grazed instead of killing. The outlaw snarled and fired back, the shot tearing through Elias's sleeve. The pain burned hot, but he kept his ground. Behind him, a scream cut through the chaos. Tasa's voice. He turned, heart lurching. She was down near the river's edge, one hand pressed to her side, her shawl dark with blood. Children huddled behind her, crying. Nayeli saw it too and broke into a run, crossing the open space between huts as bullets tore the air around her. Elias moved to cover them, firing until the rifle clicked empty. The last of Devlin's men, wounded and disoriented, spurred their horses and fled into the desert. Only Devlin remained, bleeding and swaying. Elias advanced slowly, rifle hanging loose in his hands. Devlin spat blood and laughed. "Guess you finally picked a side." Elias looked at him with quiet fury. There never should have been sides. He struck the man once, clean and final. When Devlin fell, the dust rose like a curtain drawing to a close. For a long moment all was still but the crackle of fire and the low murmur of the river. The air smelled of gunpowder and rain that would not come. Elias dropped to his knees beside Tasa. Nayeli was already there, pressing cloth to the wound. Tasa's face was pale, her breath shallow but steady. "She'll live," Nayeli whispered. The bullet passed through. Tasa's eyes fluttered open. She saw Elias and tried to smile. You should have gone when you said you would." He shook his head. "Couldn't leave things broken." Her fingers brushed his, weak but warm. Nayeli looked away, tears shining in her eyes that she refused to let fall. When the sun finally climbed clear of the smoke, the battle was done. The outlaws were gone, their bodies left to the scavengers and the dust. But peace did not return with the light. The people buried their dead. The fires smoldered in blackened rings, and in every gaze turned toward Elias Boone. There was gratitude and doubt. He had fought for them, but the shadow of his past had brought the war to their doorstep. That evening, as the sky dimmed to amber, Elias sat by the river again, his arm bound, his rifle across his knees. Nayeli came quietly, carrying a bowl of water. She cleaned his wound without a word. When she was done, she asked, "Those men, were they yours once?" He nodded. "They were. A long time ago." She didn't speak again. She simply looked at the river, at its ripples carrying the ashes of spent gunpowder downstream. Between them stretched a silence too deep for comfort and too necessary for denial. Love, in that moment, felt impossible, a fragile thing amid the smoke and the dead. Yet something bound them still, not in desire but in understanding, the cost of surviving one's own choices. As the night wind rose, Elias whispered to the dark, "Some ghosts don't forgive, but they pass." Nayeli's voice was soft beside him. "So do people." The fire cracked once and the stars began to bloom, but trust, like the land after battle, would take long seasons to heal. Winter came early to the plateau that year. The wind swept down from the mountains in long whispering sighs, carrying the scent of frost and pine. By December the land was white and still. The fields that had once burned gold with corn now lay buried beneath snow. Even the river moved slower, its edges frozen into glass. Inside the lodges the fires burned low, and the days folded in on themselves, quiet, gray, and waiting. Tasa lay on a mat near the hearth, recovering slowly. The wound along her ribs had closed, but the ache beneath it lingered. She hid her pain behind small smiles and sharp words. Bitterness had begun to bloom inside her, slowly, quietly, like mold in a dark place. Sometimes she would laugh too loudly at nothing at all. Other times she would stare into the flames until her eyes went glassy, lost somewhere Elias could not reach. Elias Boone kept to the outer edge of the camp. Though the people did not drive him away, their silence said enough. He built himself a small shelter near the riverbank from fallen branches and canvas, where he mended what few things he owned. Each evening he lit a small fire and stared into it as though searching for something buried in the coals. His hands, restless and cracked from cold, found purpose in the rebuilding of an old rifle. It was a gun he had taken from one of the fallen outlaws, a weapon scarred by misuse. Patiently, night after night, he cleaned and repaired it, not as a thing for killing but as a ritual of repentance. He swore to himself it would fire only once more, if the day came that he had to defend those who no longer trusted him. Nayeli spent her days between two fires, her sister's bed and Elias's lonely camp. She carried herbs to Tasa, water to Elias, and silence between both. The winter had tightened around her like a shawl she could not remove. At night she began to sew. The cloth she worked was white deer hide, soft and pale as moonlight. Her fingers moved slowly, pulling each thread with care. She told herself it was to keep her hands busy through the cold months, but in truth, the act had become something else. It was a wedding dress. Not for her, not yet for anyone. She did not even know whose dream it served. But each stitch felt like a prayer, or perhaps a surrender. One night she found Elias sitting beside his fire, the rifle across his knees. Snow fell thick around them, the flakes glowing softly in the reflected light. He did not turn when she approached. "You should not be here," he said. "Neither should you," she answered, and sat down across from him. The river beside them was frozen at the edges, its middle still whispering beneath the ice. Elias studied the flames. "You think she hates me?" "She hates the wound," Nayeli said quietly. "And she hates what it means." He looked at her then, his breath a pale mist between them. "What does it mean?" Nayeli did not answer. Her eyes lowered to the rifle. "You fix a thing that brought death," she murmured. "Perhaps I do the same." They sat in silence for a long time, listening to the fire crackle. When she finally stood to leave, he spoke her name softly. "Nayeli." She paused. "I'll be gone when spring comes." She nodded once, as if she had known that truth all along, then disappeared into the snow. The weeks turned inward. Time became a circle of frost and fire. Tasa grew strong enough to walk again, but the warmth that once defined her had thinned. She watched Nayeli work by the light of the hearth, the deer-hide dress spreading across her lap like captured snow. "What are you making?" she asked one night. Nayeli didn't look up. "Something to wear when the cold ends." "For him?" Tasa's voice cracked like ice. Nayeli froze. "No," she said too quickly. The air between them tightened. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. Tasa's hands clenched in her blanket. "You think I don't see it?" "The way you look at him, like he's something lost you could still save." Nayeli's needle trembled. "You loved him first," she whispered. Tasa's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall. "I still do, even now, even knowing he brought death to our door." Silence hung heavy. Outside, the snow thickened, muffling the world into stillness. "I never wanted what was yours," Nayeli said. Tasa shook her head. "We share everything, sister. Blood, pain, even the same heart that breaks twice." Her words cracked something open between them. The sound was not a cry, but the quiet collapse of something old and sacred. Nayeli dropped the needle. Tasa reached for her hand. The contact was brief but enough. Warm skin against cold fingers, forgiveness without words. When Nayeli finally spoke, her voice was soft. "Then let it end with winter." Tasa nodded slowly. "If it ends at all." They sat together until the fire died down, the glow fading into a red hush. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the world in clean white silence. Ash turned to peace, sorrow to stillness. And beneath that snow, love lay sleeping, neither gone nor forgiven, waiting for the thaw that would decide its fate. Spring returned slowly, hesitating over the plateau as if unsure the frost would loosen its grip. Snow melted into rivulets that whispered down the riverbank, carrying fragments of winter's silence into the land below. The soil softened, the mesquite buds swelled, and the air held a green scent, raw and new. Life returned cautiously, like a man walking on old regrets. The settlement prepared for a ceremony to bless the fields. Smoke rose from cooking fires in early morning light, and drums beat a slow, insistent rhythm that echoed off the hills. All were expected to participate, and tradition demanded the sisters, Nayeli and Tasa, dance together to honor both past and promise. Elias Boone watched from the edge of the gathering. His pack was ready. The rifle he had repaired leaned against a post. He had decided he must leave before spring fully woke the world, and with it the longing he could not answer. To remain was to wound further, yet to go was to betray the fragile peace he had come to cherish. The sisters stood at the center of the plaza, sunlight glinting off Tasa's bright beads and Nayeli's braid, now bound with care but lighter than before. Elias felt his chest tighten. The sight of them together was a beauty tempered by danger, a living reflection of what he could never fully claim. The wind rose as the drums began to play, a gust carrying the smell of wet earth and warm tea. Clouds gathered overhead, dark and low, and the first rumbles of thunder murmured along the horizon. The storm seemed a sentinel, as if nature itself waited for what must be revealed. Tasa glanced at Nayeli, her eyes wide and unguarded. Nayeli met her gaze, steady and calm. Then, as though drawn by invisible threads, both sisters stepped toward the center, not with weapons, not with anger, but with truth. "I love him," Tasa said first, voice trembling, her hands clenching at her sides. "I always have. And I cannot lose him to your quiet ways." Nayeli's eyes softened. "I love him too," she admitted, "but that love is not mine to claim. It never was." The words hung in the air, heavy as rain on sun-baked clay. Elias watched, heart clenched, realizing that all the careful restraint, all the quiet sacrifices, had led to this singular, aching moment. Tasa's lips parted. "Do you mean to step aside?" Nayeli nodded, humility etched into her every movement. "I will not fight for a heart that does not belong to me. I step back, so what love there is can live without poison." The wind lifted Tasa's hair, strands whipping across her face like banners of flame. She felt the sharp sting of jealousy, of grief, and of understanding. Love demanded mercy, not possession. It demanded courage, not to seize but to release. She took a slow breath and saw for the first time the nobility in her sister's choice. Elias could not remain. His presence had become both gift and curse. He stepped forward, voice low against the gathering storm. "You both saved me from the man I was," he said, his gaze sweeping the sisters, taking in every tremble, every unspoken plea. "I cannot stay, not here, not among ghosts I helped create, but I leave in peace, carrying the memory of what you both gave me." He placed a folded note on the altar where offerings of corn and wildflowers rested and turned toward the edge of the plateau. The first heavy raindrops fell, mingling with the wind as thunder rolled louder, a judge marking the passage of time and choice. The sisters watched him ride, his figure becoming small against the expanse of hills and clouds. Their hands touched briefly, Nayeli's steady, Tasa's trembling, and the world seemed to hold its breath with them. Tasa whispered, almost to herself, "Some loves are not meant to be claimed." Nayeli nodded. "They are meant to teach us how to let go." The drums ceased, replaced by the hiss of rain on the earth. The storm passed quickly, leaving the plateau washed in fresh green, the river swollen in silver under the retreating clouds. Life went on, but nothing about it felt simple. They had survived heartache together, the bonds of sisterhood strengthened by trial, tempered by honesty. When the night fell, the two sisters stood at the river once more. The wind rippled through the grass, carrying the scent of wet soil and pine. Each held a piece of the past within her, love unclaimed, grief endured, and a quiet reverence for the sacrifice the other had made. Nayeli looked to Tasa, voice soft, almost shy. "Perhaps one day the river will carry him back to us." Tasa shook her head, smiling faintly through tears. "Perhaps, but if it does, he will find we have grown, changed, and learned to love without taking. That is enough." Together they walked back to the lodge, their footsteps leaving faint impressions in the wet earth. The storm had passed. The world smelled of life renewed, and yet within them, something permanent had shifted. A love once shared, now honored in absence. A quiet lesson etched into the soul. Elias Boone rode alone into the distance, thunder still echoing across the hills behind him. And in the hearts he left there was grief, but also an enduring light. The knowledge that some loves exist only to teach the heart how to let go. Years had passed since the storm and the duel of hearts. The desert had changed little, but time had carved its quiet marks upon Elias Boone. His hair was flecked with gray, his skin weathered like old leather left out in sun and wind, and the scar along his jaw had softened with age, though it remained a reminder of past violence. He lived at the far edge of the frontier, where mesquite and stone ruled the horizon. A small cabin of rough-hewn timber stood against the ridge, smoke curling from its chimney like a signal to no one in particular. Travelers rarely came this far, and even fewer stayed. He preferred it so. His life had become one of solitude, measured in the slow rhythms of the land. Water flowing in the creek, the scrape of wind over stone, the distant call of coyotes in the evening. One morning, just as the first amber light of dawn painted the ridges, a traveler arrived on horseback. He carried no pack, no trade, only news. "You may not know me," the man said, tipping his hat. But there are two sisters who still speak your name when the wind rises through the valley. They ask after the man who rode through their lives like a storm. Elias said nothing. He had long known his presence lingered in the stories of those he had touched, though he had imagined it differently, less vivid, less alive. The traveler rode off with a nod, leaving Elias alone with the vast, unbroken silence of the desert. Days passed, and life moved as slowly as the sun over the mesas. Then one morning, a figure appeared in the mist that clung to the lowlands. At first he thought it was a trick of the light, a mirage conjured by the heat of the earth. But as the shape drew closer, he recognized the careful, measured rhythm of a horse's gait, the braid of hair swinging lightly over a shoulder. It was Nayeli, older now, her face softened by years of work and sorrow, yet still carrying the quiet strength that had first drawn him into the Apache settlement all those seasons ago. In her hands she carried a bundle of wildflowers, their colors vivid against the muted desert tones. She dismounted with a grace he remembered, her boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. They did not speak at first, letting the silence stretch between them like a bridge, long and tentative. The years had tempered them both, Elias with his solitude and Nayeli with a life measured in patience and responsibility. "You look well," he said finally. "And you," she replied, voice quiet but steady. "Look as if you have carried the world on your shoulders and set it down carefully each night." They shared a faint smile. Neither sought to fill the silence with what had passed, for the weight of it was enough. Nayeli knelt and set the bundle of flowers on the ground, brushing the petals lightly with her fingers. "Tasa married a trader," she said, almost as though reading his thoughts. "She moved north, fierce as ever. Happy, I think." "It suits her," Elias nodded. "I am glad," he said, though his chest ached at the thought. Nayeli's eyes met his. "I did not come for old love," she said. "I came for peace." He studied her, seeing both the young woman who had first watched him by the river and the elder who had carried grief and responsibility without complaint. "Peace," he repeated softly. "I have chased it like the wind, and it is fleeting." "Perhaps that is why we need it," she said. "Even fleeting, it reminds us we are alive." For a long while they moved together to a small clearing where Elias had buried his rifle years before, under a cairn of red stones. He had kept it nearby through winters and summers, a relic of both protection and regret. Now together they dug the earth, and the rifle went back into the red soil, carefully with reverence. The act was quiet, almost sacred, not a farewell, not a burial of memory, but a closing of a chapter that had long demanded an ending. When the work was done, they stood in the soft morning light, hands brushed, faces angled toward the distant ridges. The wind picked up, lifting strands of hair and the edges of their clothing. "You have changed," Elias said, the word simple yet heavy. "And you," Nayeli replied, "have learned to carry what cannot be changed." He watched her for a long moment, committing the curve of her face, the calm of her posture, the quiet power that never needed to declare itself. She had not come to rekindle what had been lost. She had come to release it, and in doing so she offered him the same freedom. Finally she mounted her horse again. The sun rose, painting the horizon gold and crimson, stretching shadows across the desert. Elias felt a soft ache as she spurred her mount into the trail that led away from him, toward the land she now called home. He whispered to the wind, barely louder than a breath, "The heart may belong to one, but love belongs to all it touches." The desert seemed to carry the words, scattering them over the mesas and into the canyon walls, a quiet truth for the ages. The horses stirred, the mesquite swayed, and the river in the distance shimmered like silver threads under the new sun. Elias remained at the clearing, feeling both the weight of absence and the lightness of closure. He thought of Tasa dancing on the riverbank long ago, of Nayeli, quiet and steadfast, of all the choices made, sacrifices kept and lessons learned. His heart no longer ached for possession, it ached for understanding, for the gentle proof that love, even unclaimed, left its mark. He walked back to his cabin, each step measured as if setting the pace of a new life. Outside, the wind lifted once more, carrying with it the faint scent of wildflowers and snowmelt, the echo of laughter, and the memory of two sisters who had shaped a man more by their mercy than by their love. That evening, the plateau glowed in the last light of day. The mountains, the river, the wind, all bore witness to what had passed and what remained. Life would continue as it always had in small, patient rhythms. And Elias Boone, once a man marked by scars and solitude, understood at last that love's power did not require possession, only presence, memory, and quiet grace. And so the desert kept its secrets. And so the heart learned the truth, that destiny does not choose between love and loss. It weaves them together into the same braid, and only those who survive the journey can see its pattern.